Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you're listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
We find ourselves in Luke chapter 8 and verse 26, and going to jump right in today. It's a longer reading, and so if you need to jump ahead, that's fine, but we're going to be reading through the entire story. The heading in my Bible says Jesus restores a demon-possessed man, and so that we'll begin in 26, reading down. So I just encourage you to take this in, and specifically with this story, really put yourself in the picture. You've been in a boat, and you're coming up, you're probably wet is my assumption, and you're finally to land. And so I'll leave that as the only preface. We can come back and do some, or do we do that first? We do that before the reading, don't we?
We usually do, but
it
doesn't matter. I
have no memory. Let's do that. Well, I'll read. You give any additional context.
Okay, I think I'm leaving all this in. I think this is gold.
You're like this is what it's really like to deal with this lunatic, and not the guy possessed by the demon, the guy on the microphone. Okay,
good save.
Verse 26. They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him, and they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. And in another version, it says he went through the 10 cities of Decapolis. This was historically Philistine land. So he's going into spaces that aren't inherently monotheistic and spaces, I don't even know how much Jesus touched of that area. So that's fascinating too. But anyway, anything you'd give us to set us up for the reading now that we've done the reading?
So I'm glad we did that because it helped unlock some things for me that I think are important. Just important to keep in mind as we have a conversation. I think about if you've ever had anybody in your life that has deep mental health issues, somebody that you would describe as not in their right mind. I'm not going to make a theological claim about what impact demons have in any given mental health situation or any given psychotic break or whatever you would have. But I do think there's the image that we get of this man before, whether you have had somebody in your life personally or you've, just so around your work or on your commute, you've seen the same homeless person that clearly is just deeply troubled, and deeply, broken and needs help. I think we can all kind of understand the astounding nature of what it would be like for then that, if you saw that homeless man on the street you see every day on the way to work, for him to suddenly the next day be all put together, wearing a suit, and not just that, but like talking normally and like engaging in a way that he had not been before. I think that sort of astonishment and putting a face to this man, I think would be really helpful for us.
I love that. And one of the things I think is I wouldn't have thought of had you not said that. There are people, if you read about, demon possession in general, and there are two things that pop into my head. Number one, where are the demons today? Why don't we have demon possession today? or the flip side of people looking into the Bible and saying that's mental health issues. That's not that's like, oh, that guy has his demons kind of feel. And one of the things that's really important to me is, we're dealing with interpretation on both sides of this, and so I do know here's the facts that I know. Jesus is very clear there is a demonic world. Jesus is very clear that he acknowledges that we have these dynamics of heart, mind, soul, strength that's in us, and there's this emotional part of us. We know that there's the conscious mind, and everybody's got a subconscious mind, and we know that people show symptoms, and that's really where I like to operate from is regardless of what's happening now, because I think it's an overstatement to say, well, there are no demon possessions now because Paul writes that, this era is done. I'm like, I don't see it. I think it's really presumptuous for me to say there's no demon possessions, even if we largely what we're assessing in psychological things is symptoms. And then we have to give a cause because of we got to give it a diagnosis. We get funded by insurance. Sure. You know what I mean? But it's like the root of it. Yeah, it could be trauma, but you can't say there's no spiritual part of that.
Of course.
And so this whole dynamic. But if you're just talking about symptoms, which I believe is a safe conversation, regardless where you're coming from, that's exactly right. If you just take it out of the scripture and say, I know a guy who won't keep his clothes on. And I know a guy who has to be restrained and fights through those restraints, and he's yelling at people when they're coming by, and he makes everybody feel unsafe. You would immediately think I was describing a guy that most likely has deep mental health issues. I saw a guy yesterday screaming at people and giving them the bird, traffic as they're driving by, and he's just screaming at them. Mm-hmm. And that's a really good start, at least in picturing this man, because that's what's described.
Yeah.
That wherever it came from. Now, I'm not denying this context. I think what happened here happened. I do. Yeah. But I also know Jesus had insight, and that the demons communicated with him in a way they seem not to have communicated most of the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, so that's the length of my, or the depth of my knowledge.
Sure. And I think theologically, I feel pretty okay in terms of where I land on those two things. I don't know. I think if you are using, let's say you fall on the side of saying, all mental health today and back then is all mental health problems are caused by demons. Okay. I want to see what does that mean for how you love the person? What does that mean for how you interact with them? Does that mean you are using that theology to explain away bad behavior, to prohibit people from getting help or medicine or therapy? What's important to me is that whatever side you fall on, you are giving dignity to the person in front of you, and you're treating them the way that Jesus would treat them.
That right there is so direct target. And I think when I'm misunderstood in my preaching, a lot of times I think that because of the way people are conditioned, how they've listened to preaching and what's been reinforced over the years, they're listening for what are the facts. Mm-hmm. And I want to know the facts. But when Jesus says, and I can't say this enough, that there is a greatest command, which he didn't have to say, and then he says it's love God, love others, then everything has to be broken against that. Everything has to honor that.
Yeah.
You can't isolate this text and say, well, I don't have to love you because you're disagreeing with me or because you're doing this wrong. And I think that should always be the measure, is how does this concept educate me on how to love better? I want to be super clear. I think because of chemical dynamics in our brain, that's a proven to me. That affects how you process information and how you deal with your emotions. Trauma, the more they discover, they're now saying that in DNA, trauma actually will go on to the next generation. That it's not just the way you're raised, but those things. And I think the more we understand those things, the more we'll see. And I don't think that's outside of the scope of what God tells us.
Sure. And even if you want to take another separation of degree of somebody who has deep childhood trauma, and they're dealing with PTSD from that. Who's to say, like, even if you want to say, well, that person, like, I don't want to diagnose exactly what's going on with them and what the spiritual components versus, the mental health. Although I don't think it is a versus. I think it's an and usually.
Right.
It can be an and. but what I would say is like, I think it's easy for me to look at a situation where I know people who in their childhood had deep evil committed upon them, and they're dealing with ramifications of that today. Do I know like, oh, there's demon possession in that person? Like I have no idea. But can I say that what happened to them was demonically inspired? Like I feel pretty comfortable saying that. And so I want to exist in a world, or I want to process theology or the Bible in a way that isn't trying to minimize the world's problems or the person in front of me's problems to an easily formula that I get to execute here and now. And so, yeah, I get, cause like there was a time where I'd be frustrated by not firmer. Here's exactly what this means and yada, yada, yada. And if that's you, I totally get that. And I see how somebody would come at that. For me, it doesn't seem, if that is the way that we're approaching people, it doesn't seem as useful or as loving.
Yeah, and that's true. I think it's good, and this has nothing fundamentally to do with our text today, other than it has to do with every text, is that idea of why is this important for me to have the fullness of the answer here? Why is it important to me that I know here's the edges of this? Yeah. Because I get a lot of questions like that around the church I get to be with, is that I will preach something and they were like, well, how far does the grace of God go? Like, where does justice end here? And I'm like, okay, I get it. I do. And different brains function differently in what's important. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, can we first funnel this through or filter this through? I can't wait to love God better. I can't wait to love other people better. Now, do you still need all those answers? Like I get it academically or abstractly. I want to know. So I'll know what to do. But we already know what to do. Yeah. Now how we do it, it shifts, because that guy that's screaming at the cars yesterday, I'm like, I think it's best for me not to engage him. I just think I would frustrate him more, but there may be other times I'll see him and I'm like, I think the best thing to do here is get him a meal, And so we know what to do. We just don't necessarily know how to do it. Yeah. I know I'm to love this person.
Yeah. So this is what amazes me, I think, about this passage in general, because this comes right after Jesus calms the storm, and it's this grand, I don't know if proof is the right word, but it's this grand example of the power of God. And it would have been something that they would have been, like the disciples witnessing, like, holy smokes, like he's a Messiah, but also I don't even know if they would have expected that he would have that sort of power. And the way that so many of us want to view God is this like weather controlling, otherworldly, can't even begin to understand or to get a piece of far off God that's manipulating the chessboard from far away. And then immediately after we see like the immense power that Jesus has, you have this deep personal story with one man. It's not even and there was this problem with this community that had this man, and this man was like this community was really struggling because this man was like and there's a piece of that. But Jesus goes from this massive altering weather patterns to like, I'm going to alter this man right in front of me. And this is the gospel. It's God coming down here on earth as being embodied, not just as a God that shapes grand historical events, but shapes the individual man in front of him.
I love that. And I love that idea of, and I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in with my amazement is how tired is Jesus? He was sleeping in the boat. He quiets it. And before this, he fed 5,000. He's been doing. He just learned, I think that's when he walks on the water. But he's tired, obviously, and he's wet, and they get to the shore, and then I assume it's like dusky, and so, cause it's at nighttime when they're going across the lake. And then this man's running from the tombs. I mean, the whole setup is, even if you get beyond the terrifying piece of it, like this is like a horror story. Oh, really?
I know, Jason, there's been many times, because if it's happened to me, I know it's happened to you, where you've had a crazy busy day and you've worked and you've done even done the Lord's work, done great stuff. And then you're like getting ready. Okay, now I get to go home. I get to disconnect. And then you get a text message or a call, and you're like, you look at the number, you're like, oh no. Oh, this is mine. I have a choice. Do I pretend I didn't see this? What do I do here?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the one that stands out to me the most is it was my birthday. This is several years ago. And I had worked really hard that day, and like I'd finally transitioned. Now I'm going to celebrate my birthday, and and we're literally, we had just done dinner, and we're coming back, I think, to open gifts, and I get a call, and this man was in real time dying.
Oh man!
And I mean, without question, I knew I wanted to be there, and simultaneously, I thought the answer, because this person never was needy ever, still's not needy, you know? And so I was like, oh, they must be calling to say, hey, what time are we meeting tomorrow? Whatever, you know? And then it's like, yes, this significant person in my life is dying right now. Can you come to the hospital? And that doesn't happen regularly in my world. But it was, even then I was like, I was so tired of being asked to think and do and be there. I can't imagine what Jesus is experiencing. So that care, I think it's really worth magnifying him. And I think it's interesting. He wanted to make this quick and clean because it's running. This man is running up, and it's interesting that they don't detail that. Like you would think the first interaction is him saying, you know, don't torture me. But then it says that they skipped a beat because like Jesus had said, come out of this, you know, impure man, impure spirit. So that's not a direct quote. It's the telling of the quote, like the narrator speaking that, you know, Luke in this case. And it's that idea that he's like, get out of him, and it's done. But then Jesus engages. So he's got care for the man, but then he's got care for the demons. Like he's engaging the demons. And he's, you use the term give dignity a lot, and that's really super useful to me to frame encounters. But it's like he's giving dignity to the existence of these demons and honoring their request. The other thing is, which I can't escape, I mean, obviously, number one, he's talking to demons. Number two, they are asking for permission to experience, well, what we know ends up as, like the pigs die. Now where do they go? I don't know. Like, did the demons... Here's a question I guess I have. Well, I'll get to the with the perplexed part, but it is that part of just he's amazing that he's honoring the choice of the demons to go into. I mean, the whole thing is so outer limits, but it is that, and they're like, and then them testifying functionally to, you could torture a demon. It's one thing for me to say that's a demon. It's another thing to say I'm going to cast out. It's another thing to say, I'm going to torture him. You know, so they respected him so much. They're like, not just don't cast, because they even say, cast us out. We get it. It's bad for us to be in this man functionally. But can you cast in the pigs? Because there's an alternative, either of going to the abyss or being tortured. The power that he has access to is even now, it's like unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a part of this that I think it can make me appreciate so much more how, like you mentioned, how tired Jesus must be in this moment. Because I think about, if I'm trying to get in the mind of Jesus right now, there are obviously spiritual powers and things going around him that Jesus has perception of, that I think sometimes we can have perception of, and we can maybe become more in tune with it as we follow him. But still, Jesus has a much greater perception of the spiritual, say the spiritual beings, or some deeper realities beyond just what is physically obvious to our eyes in front of us. And so that gives me even more respect. Sounds silly to say. Yeah, I respect the Messiah, the Son of God, the Savior of the world. But it helps me just even go like, you talked about how tired and how exhausted Jesus must have been, but he's not just experiencing all this list. He does this list of things that would make us tired as like a busy day work. He's also able to perceive all of these deeper realities underneath him, and how much that would push Jesus. Like you wonder, like it's like you talk about his power here and how he exercises it, and it is grand and it's masterful. But I also go like, I'm just left wondering, like, this is not a complete one-off story, But it does feel like if you were reading this for the first time, you'd almost be like, okay, and now we get into the portion where Jesus is dealing directly with demons, or earlier back whenever he was in the wilderness and the angels attended to him. Now we get a kind of further breakdown of what that looks like. How does Jesus? And so the fact that we don't get that is perplexing, which is not what I'm saying. But like there's so much here, and like there's so much that we take for granted that Jesus is just like. That he's not like he's having to process even more than I thought before.
Yeah. It's funny. Something struck me. Do you remember in was it Captain America: Civil War? So this is going to be a really serious discussion. But in that movie, they're the Avengers are fighting the other Avengers, and Ant-Man, who can make himself very small. They're needing a diversion, and he said, hey, I can also become really big, and nobody knew that, so it becomes really big. And then Iron Man, Tony Stark, says, anybody on my team have any yet unrevealed superpowers? That's Jesus here. I mean, and it's funny because we were talking about he calms the storm, and that's big. And now he's making it really intimate with this one guy. But really, and that's true, but really he goes, hey, I can control the storm. And you're like, oh, what's bigger than controlling the entire ecosystem of the world? He's like, yeah, what's bigger than that is controlling the entire ecosystem of the demon world, which I have to assume is bigger, So on one hand, it's really intimate, and then simultaneously it reveals his stretch is enormous. It's like if you go someplace with a guy and you're in a restaurant and he goes, hey, I want to order off the menu and bring me this stuff that nobody else knows. Or like I'm even talking about going to a diner and somebody's like, can you bring me the special blackberry jelly? That you're like, oh, he's got reach. But what if he came in and is like, could you also massage this guy's feet? And they're like, yeah, we'll cover that. And you're like, wow, this guy's got power. Jesus is like, I calm the storm, I heal the man, but I also control the whole world behind functionally everything that ever has hurt you, because all this evil it's coming from the same direction, So it's just amazing. Now, what perplexes me, can I
go for it?
What perplexes me is this thought: do the demons know? The way I assume what happens with the pigs is that that energy, or whatever you want to call it, in the pigs causes them to go crazy and they run off. And the question I have is, did the demons know that, or did they imagine? And I mean, it's unanswerable, I suppose, unless you have special pig knowledge that I'm excited to know if you know. But it is that idea of, were they expecting the pigs to commit suicide and that freed them to go? Because now, what is the abyss? Is that punishment? And that's a knowable factor. I mean, biblically speaking, we can look that up and learn a little bit more. But to me, I would think their existence in a human host, or not a human, but in a living host, would be a goal. Or did they know, no, it's going to commit suicide, and somehow we circumvent the abyss? But when those things died, then did the demons, now they're free to, like, are they locked in? And functionally what I'm asking is, can you tell me the rules of possession and the parameters of how that goes? So I understand that's unknowable, but it's a fascinating thought that just struck me, is like they asked for something that we know. And kind of, I guess I've always assumed, if demons are in pigs, they're going to go out of their mind. But I'm like, did they assume? No, we're going to be in the pigs for a long, long time. So I don't know. It's not really valuable, but it's intriguing.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think, and so this sort of information, I'm such a geek and such a nerd for this, and so there's a part of me that's just like, if there was a Silmarillion for this sort of stuff of demonology, and like I'd be right there. I'd be so excited, and like I'd be the number one consumer of that sort of stuff just because I love weird lore like this. I do think for me, because it's such a, like, even while you were talking there, it sparked something for me, and I went to go search something about Legion and about what, like, there was something specific that happened there that I was like, ooh, it'd be so easy for me to get off into a little rabbit trail down the road on this. And I think there are lots of things we can do with this passage, and lots of things we can do with specifically your piece of, like, just wanting to know what all this means, what it looks like, how it affects me today. There's a part of this where, like, I think for me, like, I do wonder if Jesus is like, yeah, maybe a different season, Connor. I'll lead you into, like, some knowledge, some teaching and knowledge that'll be really helpful about exorcism or about how demons interact with day to day and mental health. But right now, you would just attempt to download that knowledge. You would attempt to take it on as a practitioner. Maybe you attempt to take it on as a practitioner, as opposed to like, you know, I think it's a blessing for me that it is so complicated, because my natural instinct would be to just get obsessed with the small things, to get obsessed with the intricacies and the details here. And so I have all the same questions you have, and I want to know the answer deeply, and I'm excited one day to possibly know, whether it's this life or the next, how all this is at play. But again, I think it's the part maybe we talked about before, you know, in our setup, in our context, where it'd be so easy. Like if I was a disciple watching Jesus do this, I wonder if I'd be like, oh my goodness, he just healed that man. Like, this is incredible. Or would I be like, okay, so what is he said? He called them legion. He called them mob. So does that mean that every time we come into contact with multiple demons, you know, is that a name for this specific cluster, or is that a name? You know,
yes,
like I think you would just
what's the hierarchy here?
Yeah, what's the hierarchy here? What's
happening?
Yeah, what are the protocols? Like, is this a higher level, lower level? Now, what does this mean for? They knew you, Jesus. So what does this mean for like the effect on free will? Like that's all I'd be cared about. And like you'd have this man who was a menace to himself and society, who's healed and now is better, and I would lose sight of that man, because I would just be like, I want to know the intricacies and the specifics here. And I think that's the continual thing that I'm having to guard against, is like I'm losing sight of the man, and Jesus holds it all together and still has the side of the man in front of him.
That's right, and it is so hard to do. There's a point there that I just think is so fascinating. You know, in the military, that concept of no man left behind is so important. I understand that that's the picture of a guy that's dying and, you know, that kind of thing. But it's fascinating, this hard boundary that Jesus sets with this guy. Mm-hmm. And his commission to the guy is, no, you can't go with me. Go tell everybody what you knew. What does he know? Does he know about baptism? Does he know about the death, burial, and resurrection? Obviously, that has not even happened yet. Does he even know Jesus' identity? All he's doing is going around and saying, I had a demon, and here's the stories that go with that. And I encountered this man. I assume he picked up his name. His name was Jesus, maybe Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, unless there's no teaching piece here. Yeah. You know, and Jesus like, go and tell them what God has done for you. How, and that application is, I think all the time people are like, well, I don't want to talk to people about Jesus because they're going to ask me something I don't know. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, I don't know if I can defend the canonization process or whatever. And Jesus like, yeah, just, you can do what you want there. But I didn't ask you for that.
You realize, so like, I don't know. Does he hear when the demons say, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Like, so is that who he's telling? Like, does this man,
oh, whoa.
Is Jesus like, is he going out there and saying this to other Jewish people? Or are they saying, well, by what authority? You're like, well, there's some demons that were possessing me for a long time.
Right.
And you're like, so you're saying the demons say this about him?
Yes. That just occurred to me. So what part did Jesus give you? Well, He healed me. And like, where are you getting all this knowledge? Oh, the demons taught me that.
They seem to know a lot about that guy.
I know. I mean, that's mind blowing to me. Yeah. Like, how many conversations are you in? Like, what else did the demons teach you? Mm-hmm. You know, okay, I'm useless to you now. What perplexes you?
Yeah, I do want to say, I think that, I think most of the time in my own life, when I try to use lack of knowledge to talk to people about Jesus, when I try to use like a fear of not having the right answers, it's occasionally, maybe a few times, it's been the right wise choice. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it's just excusing away and
justifying.
I don't want to do it. It's going to make me feel uncomfortable, or it's going to be whatever. And to know, I remember as a youth pastor talking to kids who would say things about Jesus to like other kids. Like, well, I was talking to my friend at school and I said, you said what about Jesus? You invited him and you said that, oh my word. Okay. And you're like, I don't want to crush this kid's spirit. Cause like they're talking to kids about Jesus, but also like, wow,
they're misrepresenting
him. Yeah. And you want to, and you go like, okay, Jesus trusts this man who's been possessed for how long by a demon to be some form of Jesus is trusting enough of God ultimately to be trusting enough of this man to be okay with the misrepresentations that this man has to make of Jesus. Yeah. And I was like, okay, if Jesus trusts God enough with that, of of knowing that this man is not going to have the quote unquote perfect gospel message memorized, and there's a piece of Jesus that's not going to fully come through and not going to be fully seen, then man, if I've got all of this, I should have more trust and faith in God.
Yeah. So I think that is the big takeaway is Jesus is like, yeah, I'm not afraid of a storm, and I'll use a storm to teach a lesson. And I'm also not afraid of a crazy man and, that's naked and bleeding, and I'm also not afraid of the demon hordes that are funneled through this one guy. It's stunning that when Jesus offers me peace, personally me peace, and he does it again and again in the Bible, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, kind of concept. Every time he does it, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's like, you don't have to be afraid of anything.
So here's what perplexes me, and I'll be quick with this. It's always perplexed me that Jesus never has let him follow him, not let the man come with him. And this is a really hard one for me, because I'm like, this is the whole point. But then Jesus tells him to do something, and so the man went away. And told, basically Jesus says, return home and tell how much God has done for you. So the man went away and told all over the town how much Jesus had done for him. And I'm like, this man who wants to physically follow Jesus, who is denied that access, is turning around and being faithful to Jesus in that. And I'm like, that is such a weird mix of, it's just a weird mix, and I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what, like if there's any sort of applicability towards like, do I oftentimes, maybe similar to other conversation, do I sometimes like, have I received something or gotten teaching from Jesus and not trusted that he's given me enough in a given moment to go off and be a representation for him? Am I sometimes too afraid? Like, do I minimize the work that Jesus has done in my heart and the Holy Spirit in me? Because like this seems so antithetical to what my picture is of being a follower of Jesus. And so, yeah, I'm processing out loud, and like, I can come to a place where I kind of feel good about it, but then I'm still like, but he wanted to follow you. And he clearly, like, it's not like a rich young ruler situation where he walks away and he does exactly what he says. And so, yeah, I don't know.
I think that it's just really important, and this is like a pretty divergent point compared to everything else we've been talking about, but it is that idea of a lot of times I'm like, man, I think I could really bless that person, but then honestly, I've had experience where I blessed a person on Monday, but then now I'm responsible for them Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I'm like, I ain't even going to bless them on Monday. You know what I mean? It's just too much. And Jesus said no to a ton of people. This is why I always have a little bit of challenge when people are like, yeah, the real job is to always be giving away food or be healing. And, we need to create a heaven on earth. And I'm like, okay, I get it. But Jesus didn't want that at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, when Jesus left towns, there were always people that were sick, always people that didn't believe. There were always people that were sinning. There were always people that were hurting other people. Every place he ever left. And when he died, he left a bunch, or when he ascended, yeah, I mean, there were tons of people left behind, and I think there needs to be a signal to us if Jesus did not feel like he had a Messiah complex with this man, because it's like the critics could have been so critical of him. It's like, wait, you say you're here to love? Mm-hmm. This guy's been demon possessed. He's been ostracized. He has no resources, and you're not even going to give him a little packet of food. Mm-hmm. You're that kind of thing. I mean, and it's not like these people weren't suspicious or superstitious. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? How much would he be marginalized? Oh, you're the guy that was, this was well known in this area, so I'm just like, it seems so callous, uncaring, but love is on a big continuum. Yeah. And if Jesus is doing it, he's loving this guy. Mm-hmm. This is the most loving thing you do for this guy. And I mean, I think it's Mark where it talks about him going and, really spreading this message and it being amazing to people. But you wouldn't have thought that at that moment when he's begging, not just saying, hey, can I go with you? Mm-hmm. Begging, a grown man begging another grown man. And the guy's like, no, go back to the people that you've hurt, and tell them this amazing story. And that amazing story will take him about 3 minutes. Yeah. And it's like, no, that's enough.
That's enough. Yeah. No, it's so good. And it's a helpful reminder you think about if this man falls to his knees in front of Jesus with the disciples to his back, and you think about like, I wonder what they felt like as they were following this rabbi around and gaining this knowledge. And at this point they haven't been sent away yet, right? The 72 have not been sent away yet. So to this point, this man who was demon possessed as of yesterday is now been given more is given more more of a mission than the disciples to this point. I would love to know what their reaction would be. And the tendency, I know, if they're anything like me, would be like, well, then what the heck are we doing? Like,
right.
Okay, like this guy, Jesus, you yanked us out of our communities. We can go, we've seen all this. We can go attest to this or whatever. And, maybe Peter's like, John was a jerk. And since he's been around you, Jesus, he's been a lot kinder. Whatever,
sure, right.
whatever it be. I think it'd be incredibly helpful to remind myself. I used to struggle with it all the time, especially when I was like a youth pastor. When a kid would say something and I was like, oh, I have not prepared them enough, or they don't have the right knowledge or this or that, to really make an impact, to really, whatever, or like my job is to completely prep them so one day they can have the knowledge to be able to go and share the gospel or be the gospel or, really be bold and brave. And it's like, that's just not the mindset of Jesus. Like, that's not the mindset of Jesus. And for Jesus, if this man, maybe he was actually, when he was in his right mind, was like incredibly articulate and thought-provoking and really good. He also could have been a mumbler and a stutterer, and could have had, we have no idea. But recognizing that, and it's a simple truth. But the path that Jesus lays out for this man to go be a missionary, to go be a preacher, to go reach the people he was, is not the same path that he has for the disciples. And so from the very beginning, there was no one way to go about this.
Right. And I feel like there's a lot of loose ends. Like we can talk about this, and this. As we end. And so on one hand, tune in next week where we will not only answer all your questions, but make all your dreams come true. But on the other hand, this is real life. Mm-hmm. This is real life where you're like, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? And God's like, yeah, I'll teach you that tomorrow. And maybe when you get to heaven, or maybe 20 years from now. And just being at peace. Yeah. Your conclusions will never bring you fully to peace. Trusting in Him is what brings you to peace. And that's what I see Jesus doing. He's trusting God with this guy.
That's good. Your conclusions will never bring you to peace. That's the good stuff. Grace, peace, and love.